Abbott well for his reaction to the formation of the AUKUS alliance and the acquisition now of a fleet of nuclear submarines. I'm joined from Sydney by former Prime Minister Tony Abbott. Tony Abbott, a hugely significant move from the Morrison government today, not just, of course, to enter this new military pact with Britain and the United States, but also to junk a $90 billion sub deal with the French, negotiated, of course, by the Turnbull government. I want to start by asking you the questions I was asking Greg. I mean, is this the right move? How significant is this day in terms of history?
This is the biggest decision that any Australian government has made in decades. It's a brave decision because it overturns decades of strategic caution, and it's an important decision because it indicates that we are going to stand shoulder to shoulder with the United States and the United Kingdom in meeting the great strategic challenge of our time, which obviously is China. So very, very important, Peter. The challenge now will be to get these new submarines in the water as quickly as possible. I don't see any reason why we can't decide whether it's to be the Virginia class from America or the Astute class from the United Kingdom this year, and start construction next year, because frankly, time is not on our side. With a decision of this nature, the best time to make it was always 5 years ago, but the second best time is now. Thank God it's happened. But honestly, there is no time to waste. We've got to get cracking. The points that Greg Sheridan made earlier, I can understand. But I certainly can't see Peter Dutton and Scott Morrison having made this decision sitting on their hands the way Greg suggested they might.
Going back to your time as Prime Minister, I know how determined you were, even though Kevin Rudd had made a decision to build submarines, nothing much had happened, and how determined you were after a particular experience, which I'll ask you to go into, in and around the G20 and our lack of capability on submarines. I'm interested in your take. I guess there wasn't an option in the past to get what we would all regard now as the crown jewels from the United States in terms of nuclear capability. How significant is that?
Look, when I became Prime Minister towards the end of 2013, I was determined to make a decision and get cracking. I wanted to avoid a Collins-type situation. The advice back then was that the best conventional submarine was the Japanese sub, so that was the way we were going. Unfortunately, politics intervened, as it sometimes does, and we ended up with, I think, a great folly, which was to take an existing French nuclear design, waste 15 years redesigning it and rebuilding it as a conventional sub that would be worse than the sub that we could have had now. The great thing about today's decision is that we don't need to redesign anything. The Astute class, the Virginia class, they are existing operational boats. We just have to get the blueprint, and that's what's been offered to us, one or the other, and get building. And now the incident you refer to, Peter, at the time of the G20, Vladimir Putin, in a move to intimidate us, sent a Russian naval task force into northern Australian waters. I discovered that we only had 2 operational submarines at the time. They were too slow and too far away to intercept this task force. The great thing about nuclear submarines is that they can cover 1,000 miles a day. They can be available where you need them almost immediately. They're almost undetectable. They can deliver massive weaponry. And this shows, Peter, that we intend to be an altogether more serious country in the future than we've sometimes been in the past. We are determined to ensure that we can tell any country, even a superpower, don't mess with us.
I also think too, you know, after a pretty tough 2 years of this pandemic, when decisions have been, duck shoved amongst people around a national cabinet table that can't hold the moment they walk out the door, and the Prime Minister has been de-elevated down to the level of a premier. This gives me confidence that as a country we can make some big decisions here. We're still willing to make these sort of big decisions. I think that, to me, is a real shot in the arm about today's move.
And you're absolutely right, Peter. This was a decision that the Prime Minister didn't need, at least at this stage, parliamentary approval for. He didn't need to get the states on board. He made this decision. There is a sense in which he has cut through 40 years of obfuscation and delay. This is leadership of a high order from Scott Morrison, and thank God we've had it.
When you were in government, you made a commitment going into winning the election in 2013 that you would lift the spend, the GDP spend on defence. It's at 2%. It seems prescient now that you even got to 2%. It was a bit of a fight to get there, but of course 2% is a lot less than we need now. We need to obviously increase that with the risk that China is there. We're entering a very new and challenging strategic era, aren't we?
I don't think people have quite worked out yet just how massive the Chinese military machine has become. In sheer numbers, the Chinese fleet is now much larger than the US fleet. In terms of missiles, China has an extraordinary capability to strike targets in the Western Pacific. We know that China is itching to take back Taiwan by force if necessary, and the best way to ensure that the unthinkable remains the unlikely is to be prepared for the worst. And what Australia indicated today, along with our great partners, the United States and Britain, we are prepared to act to meet the common danger. The danger is real. We have to meet it. You put it very well at the end of your editorial tonight, Peter. While the world might be changing for the worse, today Australia changed for the better, and we will be a much safer and stronger country as a result of this historic decision.
I'm flattered you were paying attention, boss. I've got to ask you, nuclear power, the Prime Minister pushed that to one side today. It was the condition that if nuclear power is in the mix at all, that Labor won't support it. I, though, am hopeful once we get a developed nuclear industry here in terms of sustainment of these submarines, once people can see that the concerns they have of nuclear are unfounded, they can see how important it is to our military future, they might see how important it is to our manufacturing and energy future. What do you think?
Look, I was very encouraged by the Labor Party's initial reaction today. I think it was very much in the tradition of Bob Hawke, who is undoubtedly Labor's best post-war leader. Bob Hawke was a great friend of the US alliance. Bob Hawke was always pro-nuclear, and I think that if nuclear power is okay at sea, sooner or later it's going to be okay at land, on land too. And frankly, if we are serious about cutting our emissions as quickly as possible, why wouldn't you look to the only form of emissions-free baseload power, which is currently absolutely proven?
Well, thank you for joining us on this historic day, Mr. Abbott. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Peta.